In this video, we're going to show you how to replace a water pump, timing belt, valve cover gasket, and seal kit on your Honda Accord. This will be located on the driver's side of the motor and on the top of the motor. Let's get started. Using a 19mm socket, we're going to remove the 4 lug nuts. Remove the wheel. We're going to go around removing all of the 10mm bolts for the undershield. There's one in this top corner on the driver's side. One more right in front of it. Working our way under. There's a push button clip on the top corner on the passenger side. Push on that middle tab and pull it down. Now we can remove our undershield. Using a crank holder tool and a 19mm socket, we're going to loosen the crank pulley bolt. We're going to leave it in, we just want it loose for now. We're going to open up the radiator drain. We're going to start draining the coolant. Before opening up the radiator, be sure you have a drain pan under you. To drain the coolant faster, we're going to open up the radiator cap. This will allow air in the top and it'll flow out much easier. Once the coolant's done draining, go ahead and close the coolant drain. We're going to remove the coil packs from the valve cover, pull straight out. Pull the wires out of the bracket on the top and on the side. We're going to flop all of these over to the side, out of the way. Remove the vacuum fitting, pull straight up. Put that off to the back. There's a rubber O-ring or rubber seal right there. Using a 10mm socket, we're going to remove the bolt for the ground strap. I'm going to put that back in. We're going to remove the vacuum hose. We're going to pinch the clamp, pull it up, and remove the hose from the valve cover. Using a 10mm socket, we're going to remove the 4 nuts for the valve cover. Using a flat blade screwdriver or a pry bar, we're going to break the seal from the valve cover to the head. Using an 8mm socket, we're going to remove the bolt for the cable bracket. Pull that out of the way. I'm going to put that bolt back in. Lift straight up and remove the valve cover. Remove the seal if it stayed. We're going to put some rags over that valve cover area so nothing can fall in. Using a 10mm socket, remove the bolt for the wiring harness stay. We're going to pull that harness out of that cover. Flop it back towards the valve cover. Using a 12mm socket, loosen the two nuts for the power steering pump. There's one on the front by the belt, and there's one on the back and the top. Get these both loose. And now using a 10mm socket, we're going to take the tension off of the belt. You'll loosen this to take the tension off. It'll pull that pump down. We can remove our belt. Remove the two 12mm nuts. On the top, we'll remove the 10mm bolt going to the bracket. Pull the pump forward, out of place. We're going to pull the power steering pump backwards. We're going to move the power steering pump back, but before we do that, we're going to pull this reservoir out of the bracket just to give ourselves a little more room. Now we can easily pull that pump back. Right under the alternator pulley, you're going to find a 12mm nut. We're going to loosen this. Just get it loose. We're going to loosen the bolt in the back of the alternator. Using a 14mm wrench, loosen the top bolt. Using a 10mm socket or wrench, we're going to loosen the adjuster bolt for the alternator. This will take the tension off of the belt. I'm going to reach through the wheel well and remove the belt. Using a 10mm socket, remove the bolt for the oil dipstick. We're going to pull this straight out of the oil pan. We're going to pull that up and out. There will be an O-ring. It may be still down in the dish where this sits. If it is, go ahead and take it out. And we want to inspect this, make sure there's no cracks, make sure it's not hard. If you need to, replace it. We're going to go under the vehicle. We're going to use a jack with a piece of wood or a bushing. And we're going to jack up on the corner of the oil pan. Just put a little bit of pressure on it for now. We'll go up farther once we have the bolts out for the motor mount. Using a 10mm socket, remove the two bolts for the ground strap. Remove the ground strap. Using a 17mm socket, we're going to remove the nut and bolt on motor side for the motor mount. Using a 17mm socket, we're going to remove the bolt for the motor mount. Remove the bolt, pull the mount up and out. We're going to remove the two 10mm bolts for the timing cover. There's one on each corner. Pull straight up and remove the cover. We're going to remove that crank pulley bolt now. Remove the crank pulley bolt. We're going to pull the crank pulley off. Give it a little wiggle side to side. And remove it. Using a 10mm socket, we're going to start to remove all of the bolts for the lower timing cover. There's one right in front of the alternator. Going to the back side, we're going to have one more on the top. Right next to our dipstick hole, we're going to have another 10mm bolt for the cover. We have two more bolts on the bottom. Pull the timing cover off and push it down through the bottom. Using some nail polish, we're going to mark our two marks on our cam gear. There's one right there. There's one more right here. We're going to reinstall our crankshaft pulley. And the bolt. We're going to snug our bolt down. And we're going to turn the crankshaft counterclockwise until our timing marks on top line up. Most engines spin clockwise, but in this application we want to go counterclockwise. You can also use a crank holder tool to move our crankshaft. What we're looking for here is to see the up mark on the camshaft pulley pointing straight up, and then we're going to line up our two white timing marks with the black timing cover in the back. There's another timing mark down here on the front side of the motor. You're going to have this trench, and it's going to line up with this top mark right here. We have our camshaft pulley with the up going straight up. We have our white marks, and there's a second set of these on the back of the cam pulley that are much easier to line up. So we'll go to the back side. Once we have everything turned in the right orientation, this cover is going to line up with this mark, and the same thing in the back. It's kind of hard to see, but it's right there. And it's lined up perfectly with our cover on both sides. Once we have our timing marks lined up, we're going to go down and remove our crankshaft bolt and pulley. Once we take off that crankshaft pulley, we're going to have one more timing mark, and that's going to be this arrow right here, which is going to line up with this mark embossed right here. The last timing mark you're going to be able to see is going to be on this oil pump. It's going to have a dot on the gear. That's going to line up with this embossment on the cover in the back right here. Using a 14mm wrench or socket, we're going to loosen the adjuster nut. Once we have the adjuster nut loose, you can see that our belt is loose. Remove the nut. And the washer. We're going to remove the spring off of that tensioner. Using a 10mm socket, we're going to remove the bolt for the tensioner bracket. And remove that bracket. We can remove the pulley and remove the belt. We're going to remove the crank gear. A lot of times the keyway will come out with it. We can just push that back in. Remove the timing belt. We're going to pull this upper spring off and remove the tensioner. We're going to remove the top left bolt for the water pump. Using a 1/4" ratchet with a 10mm socket, there's a slot in the mount that we're able to fit through. And we're going to remove that 10mm bolt behind there. Remove the bolt. We're going to continue going around, removing all of the water pump bolts. There's one more right under the water pump pulley. We're going to leave this bottom one just loose a few turns. Once we get all of the bolts out, we'll be able to break this free and let it drain, and that'll allow it to drain slowly rather than all gushing out and making a mess. We're going to continue going around the water pump, removing all the 10mm bolts. There's one on the bottom, right under the gear. We're going to loosen this bottom one under the gear, but we're not going to fully remove it. This will help keep us clean when we're draining and popping the water pump off. So just get it out a few threads. The spring stud is acting as a bolt as well. We're going to remove that. We have one more bolt that's located on this top right. Make sure you have a drain bucket under your water pump at this point. I'm going to use a flat blade screwdriver and open up that water pump and allow it to drain. I'm going to remove that bottom bolt that we left in. And remove the water pump. Remove the water pump. Pull it up and out. Using a razor blade or a light abrasive, we're going to clean the mating surface for the water pump. We just want to scrape off any of the old gasket or corrosion that is built up. Looks like there's a bit of RTV from the previous. Go around the whole mating surface, making sure it's nice and clean. When you're done, you can use some parts cleaner and wipe it down with a clean rag. Install the water pump. Be sure that the gasket is installed. Get the bolt started. Don't forget the one that's hidden behind the mount. Go around and torque the bolts to 8.7 foot-pounds. If you can't get a torque wrench on it, do the best you can. We're going to install our first tensioner, and when we do this, there's a small pin right here, and that's going to line up with a hole on our tensioner bracket. You want to make sure that is sitting correctly on there. Just like that. And use some spare hardware I have laying around to make a spacer. And then install the nut onto the stud. And this will hold our tensioner in place while we install the timing belt. We're going to double check our timing marks, make sure they are all in the right spot. Check your cam, check your crank. We're going to replace the camshaft seal. To do that, we're going to use an old timing belt around the gear. Hold that with a large pair of pliers. Using a 12mm socket or wrench, we're going to break free the bolt for the camshaft. We're going to push our pliers towards the vehicle and loosen the bolt. Remove the bolt, and remove the camshaft pulley. We're going to remove the two 10mm bolts for the plastic cover so we can get better at the seal. Remove the plastic cover. I'm going to remove this key and put it off to the side. We'll reinstall it before installing the pulley, but I don't want to knock it off and lose it. I'm going to use a seal puller. And pull the seal for the camshaft. If you use a flat blade screwdriver to remove the seal, be sure you don't mar the surface. We're going to use some clean engine oil and lube the seal up a little bit. It'll help it go in. We're going to line it up. Make sure it's started straight. We're going to push it down into place. We're going to basically bottom the seal out and be sure that it's sitting square. I'm going to install that keyway. Install the plastic cover. Get the bolts started by hand. Snug the bolts down. Torque the bolts to 105 inch-pounds. Make sure your keyway is installed. And install the cam gear. Install the bolt. Hold the cam pulley and torque the bolt to 27 foot-pounds. Be sure that your timing marks are lined up. Those two on that plastic cover. Remove the crankshaft gear. And that was the keeper. Don't lose this. There's a little plate behind that. We're going to go ahead and remove that. I'm going to use a seal puller and remove the crankshaft seal. Remove the crankshaft seal. We're going to apply some clean engine oil to our new seal. On the inside lip and on the outside. I'm going to use a clean rag and clean the area. Use some parts cleaner. Only spray it on the rag, do not spray it into the motor. Get the seal started. Make sure it's going in nice and square. Push the seal in and make sure it sits square. We don't want to bottom the seal out, but we also do not want it flush with the cover. In the book it tells you to use a feeler gauge on the back side, and it has a tolerance of 0.5 to 0.8 millimeters, but we're not able to get a feeler gauge to the back side. So we're going to get this in there a good amount, make sure it's sealing properly. Install the plate, install the keyway into the crank gear, and install it onto the crankshaft. Once you've checked your timing marks, we're going to go ahead and install the timing belt. We're going to worry about lining it up on the cam and the crank first. Mainly the left side. We're going to make this side tight. See, this left side is pretty tight now. We can get it just a little bit. While you're doing this, you want to make sure the crank doesn't move. It is very easy to move that bottom pulley, so keep checking that timing mark. Pull it up and over the tensioner and around the water pump. We want our right side to be nice and slack, but our left side to be pretty tight. We're going to install the spring onto the tensioner. Use a hook tool to help me attach it to the post right above it, right there. We're going to remove that adjusting nut and take out our spacers. Install the second tensioner. Install the arm. Be sure it's keyed onto that tensioner. Then we'll get the bolt started for that arm. Torque the bolt to 105 inch-pounds. Once the bolt is torqued down, you should still be able to move this pulley. We're going to install our adjuster washer and nut. And we're just going to snug this up to the pulley hand tight for now. We're going to double check our timing marks. This guy is off a bit. We're going to pull that back. Make sure that mark lines up with that embossment. I'll do the same thing on this bottom gear. There's a notch up top, and that'll be the mark that points down to the bottom right for an embossment on the case. Install the pulley onto the crankshaft. Install the balance shaft belt and double check your timing marks, being sure everything looks good. We're going to install the spring onto the tensioner arm and then pull it up to the post. You may want to go through the wheel well to install the spring. I'm going to use a right angle pick it up, and install it onto that post. Install the washer and the adjuster nut. Get it finger tight. We're going to check the tension on our belts. We'll grab the timing belt. We can get about a quarter turn out of that. That's good. And this bottom belt, a little bit looser, but that's okay. It's kind of the way they're supposed to be. Our tensions look good. So we can snug down our adjuster nut to 33 foot-pounds. If you need to adjust your tension, you can pull on the pulley slightly to get the desired tension, and then torque the adjuster nut to 33 foot-pounds. If you can't get a torque wrench on it, do the best you can. Install the crank pulley. Install the crank bolt. Snug the crank pulley bolt down. We're going to turn the engine counterclockwise and bring it all the way back around until we hit our timing marks again, just to double check that everything is moving properly. Bring the camshaft pulley back to the up position, and then we're going to go through and check all of our timing marks. We have these two on the sides that are lining up with the plastic cover. Those are good in the back. Our shaft right here, that dugout in it, is lining up. So now that we've checked our timing, we can remove our crank pulley bolt. Then remove the crank pulley. Install the lower timing cover. Install the lower cover. We're going to get the bolts started. Install the 5 cover bolts. There's one on the back top right, and one tucked up in the front. Go around and snug down all of the cover bolts. Torque the cover bolts to 105 inch-pounds. If you can't get a torque wrench on it, do the best you can. Install the top cover. Get the bolt started. One on the bottom left and one in the middle right. Snug the bolts down. Torque the bolts to 105 inch-pounds. Install the dipstick. Get it down into the hole in the bottom. Get it fully seated. Install the bolt. Snug the bolt to 105 inch-pounds. Pull the power steering pump over. We're going to reinstall the reservoir. Push it down into the bracket. Get the top and bottom bolt for the power steering pump installed. I'll put the nut on the top. And the nut on the bottom. Get the bolt installed for the bracket. Snug down the two nuts for the power steering pump. I'm going to leave this one slightly loose on top. You want to leave the two nuts loose enough that the power steering pump can move up and down. I'm going to push it all the way down. Install the belt for the power steering pump. It'll go around here, and then it'll go around the front of the crank. We'll reach through the wheel well and put it around the crank. Install the belt around the crank. I'm going to snug down the 10mm bolt. This is what we're going to use to tension the belt. Go a little bit tighter. That looks pretty good. And we'll snug down the bracket bolt. Once the belt has good tension, we can tighten the nuts. On top and bottom. Torque the two nuts for the power steering pump to 17 foot-pounds. Torque the top bolt to 8.7 foot-pounds. Pull the alternator harness over. We're going to install this into the timing cover. Install the bracket and the bolt. Torque the bolt to 8 foot-pounds. Install the motor mount. And get the nut started on the stud. Get the bolt started in the back. Snug them down. Install the bolt through the front. Get it started by hand. Torque all the fasteners for the motor mount to 47 foot-pounds. Install the ground strap. Get the two 10mm bolts started. Snug the bolts down. Torque them to 8 foot-pounds. I'll remove the wire for that harness because this ground strap ties into that bracket. Get the bolt back in. Torque it back down to 8 foot-pounds. We can remove the jack out from under the vehicle. We're going to remove our rags. We're going to go around and we're going to clean the corners of the old RTV, and we'll also go around and give the valve cover a good wipe down, get all of the oil off. Go around the whole mating surface doing this. Using a clean rag with some brake parts cleaner, we're going to go around and wipe down our mating surface once we're done cleaning. When you're wiping this, be sure to push away from the motor. We don't want to push anything in. We had some tube seals that stayed on the motor, so we're going to go ahead and remove those. We'll take a clean rag with some parts cleaner and wipe down that area. We gave our valve cover a good wipe down on the outside. We'll flip it over, make sure all of your tube seals are out, and remove the old valve cover gasket. We're going to use a clean rag. We're going to clean inside of where that gasket sat. You could use like a plastic trim tool and put it inside of the rag to be able to get down inside of the channel. Install the valve cover gasket. Install the tube seals. Push them down into place with the flat part on bottom. Make sure that this flat part is facing up when you install. They won't go in the other way, so. We're going to flip it over. Remove the inserts using a flat blade or other pick tool. There will be 4 of these. Using a clean rag, we're going to wipe down where those sat. Clean up any of the dirt or oil that was in there. Install the new ones. They'll just sit in place. Now we're ready to install the valve cover. Before installing the valve cover, we're going to put a bit of gray RTV in the corners. We're going to repeat that process for all 4 corners. If you touch the RTV with your fingers, be sure you have no oil on it. We're going to install the valve cover. Our caps fell off, so we're going to put those back on top. Get all 4 nuts started. Get these finger tight. We're going to tighten these in 3 steps to 7.2 foot-pounds. So we got them finger tight, and then we're going to go to 5 foot-pounds, and then on our final step will be 7.2. We're going to go in a cross pattern while doing this. And now we'll go to 7.2 foot-pounds. We'll go around one last time, just double checking. We're going to remove this front nut that's next to our oil cap. We're going to get our throttle cable down, reinstall the nut, and retorque it to 7.2 foot-pounds. We're going to move our ground strap from this bracket, put that bolt back in. And attach it to the valve cover. Torque both of those to 8 foot-pounds. Install the bolt for the throttle cable. Torque it to 8 foot-pounds. Install the vacuum hose into the top of the valve cover. Grab the coil and wires. You're going to pull them over and install them into the valve cover. As you pull them over, put them into the brackets. Using a coolant funnel, we're going to fill the coolant. Once you have the coolant filled, go ahead and start the car and let it run until it hits operating temp. You'll hear the radiator fans kick on. Once you have bubbles stopped coming out of the radiator, you can go ahead and remove the coolant funnel. Install the radiator cap. Install the undershield. Go around and install all of the bolts. Snug them down as you go. There should be one more here in the middle. Ours is missing. Install the plastic clip in the top passenger corner. Install the wheel. Make sure the hubcap is on there. Get the lug nut started. Snug them down. Torque the wheel to 80 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. And you're good to go.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.